I'm Eleanor Brooks, 66 years old, and at my age, my bones ache more than they used to, my eyes blur when I try to read the evening news, and my hair has long turned the color of winter frost. But none of that ever bothered me. I always believed a woman could live with hardship as long as she had a place to return to somewhere that held her memories, her sacrifices, her very breath. For me, that place was the two-story house off Willow Creek Road, a home I spent more than 40 years building penny by penny. When I first laid the foundation for that house, Martin, my husband, was still young, handsome in a careless sort of way, the kind of man who talked big but never kept a job long enough for anyone to remember his name. While he drifted through card games, beer nights and foolish bravado, I woke every day at 4 in the morning to clean offices downtown, then sold vegetables from the back of my old truck. I did every honest thing I could to keep this family standing. I told myself marriage meant holding on, even when the other person gave you nothing to hold. But time has a cruel way of showing the cracks you've ignored. When Martin got older, instead of growing wiser, he grew meaner, lazier, more impulsive. His pension disappeared in poker rooms. He came home smelling like cheap perfume and bourbon. And every time he yelled, I swallowed my pride and reminded myself that women of my generation didn't walk away, we endured. At least I did. Until the day everything broke. It was a Thursday afternoon, humid and heavy, the kind of weather that clings to your skin. I was in the kitchen stirring a pot of beef stew, something simple, something warm, when I heard the gate slam open. The footsteps weren't steady, they were loud, careless, almost triumphant. I wiped my hands on my apron and stepped toward the doorway as Martin pushed inside. He wasn't alone. Behind him sauntered a young woman, couldn't have been older than 25. Chestnut curls spilling around her shoulders, bright red lipstick, a short dress that didn't belong in any respectable home. Her heels clicked against the floor like she owned the place. Her name, I later learned, was Jade Miller. Martin wrapped an arm around her waist, bold as anything, and announced with a twisted smile, "This is Jade. She'll be living here from now on." For a moment, I couldn't even speak. It felt like someone had pulled the air out of the room. Jade leaned her body against him with a sweetness that made my skin crawl. She giggled softly and said, "I hope you understand. He and I, we really care about each other." Her words stabbed deeper than she could ever know. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "This house is mine," I said quietly, my voice shaking. "I worked for it. I built every inch of it with my own hands. You don't get to bring anyone in without asking me." I expected Martin to yell, but what he did was worse. He laughed. A cruel, dismissive laugh that told me he had planned this moment, rehearsed it even. "You old Eleanor. You done your time here. Don't make this difficult. Just leave." My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. "You throwing me out of my own home?" I whispered. Instead of answering, he hurled my backpack toward the porch. Then he tossed out a small duffel of clothes, the one I used for overnight trips to visit our son. Jade watched with folded arms, wearing a smirk that twisted my stomach. She said, "It's better this way. I'll take good care of him. You should find another place." Her tone wasn't sympathetic, it was triumphant. I stood frozen, staring at the house that held every morning I woke exhausted, every meal I cooked when Martin refused to lift a finger, every dollar I saved out of thin air. This house had held birthdays, arguments, apologies, Christmas dinners, and silent prayers whispered in the dark. Now it held none of that. Now, it rejected me. Before I could gather my thoughts, thunder cracked across the sky. Rain poured down as if heaven itself wanted to hide my humiliation. My thin cardigan was soaked within seconds. I felt my age in every joint, every trembling breath. Martin didn't look at me. Jade didn't pity me. And an old woman with nowhere to go stepped onto the wet sidewalk with nothing but a bag of clothes and a heart torn in two. I walked without direction, the rain mixing with tears I refused to wipe away. People passed me without noticing. Cars splashed through puddles without slowing down. I must have looked pitiful, a drenched old woman clutching a bag to her chest. But the thing that hurt the most wasn't the cold or the shame, it was the betrayal. A betrayal that burned deeper than any wound my body had ever felt. Hours later, when I finally found shelter at a cheap motel, I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered to myself. He might have pushed me out, but he will not walk away with what he never earned. I didn't know then how true that promise would become. But that night, alone and shaking, I made a vow. I would never let Martin steal the last piece of dignity I had left. When I left my home that night, drenched in rain and humiliation, I thought the worst was behind me. But life has a way of showing you that rock bottom can always crack deeper. I rented a tiny studio on the outskirts of Fort Worth, in a building that smelled like old carpet and distant cigarette smoke. The room was barely big enough for a single bed, a microwave, and a rusted sink, but at least it locked. At least no one could throw me out of it. The first few mornings, I woke up confused, reaching for the familiar window next to my old bedroom only to see peeling walls and a street where stray cats fought over leftover food. I'd worked my entire life, and yet here I was, living like someone who had never held a job, never saved a penny, never lifted a finger for her family. It wasn't the lack of money that broke me. It was the feeling that everything I had sacrificed had become meaningless. To survive, I took a job washing dishes at a little diner. The owner, Mrs. Thompson, didn't ask questions. She just paid me in cash and let me work quietly in the back. Some nights, my fingers stung so badly from hot water and grease that I had to soak them in cold towels before I could sleep. But at least it kept me from thinking too much. Still, whispers found their way to me. Neighbors murmured. That old man left her for a young girl. Heard the new one's real pretty. She should have known. Men his age don't stick around long. Well, she's old. That's how life goes. Every word felt like a tiny needle pushed into my skin. People love gossip, especially when it happens to someone they assume won't fight back. But through all the bitterness, one memory kept returning to me, a memory that gave me strength. Years ago, when Martin was drowning in gambling debt, he came home looking like a man who'd lost his last chance at life. His hands trembled as he told me he owed thousands. He said the people he played with were threatening him. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at him, wondering how a man could be so reckless. I didn't yell at him. I didn't shame him. Instead, I sold a small piece of land my parents left Melland that was the last connection I had to them. The moment the money transferred, Martin cried like a child. He swore he would never put me through such misery again. To prove it, he wrote something on a piece of white paper, his handwriting shaky but unmistakably sincere. It said, "I, Martin Brooks, acknowledge that all our current assets and any future property belong solely to my wife, Eleanor Brooks. I have made no meaningful contributions. I will not contest ownership now or in the future." He signed it, dated it, and asked our elderly neighbor to witness it. I kept that paper locked in a wooden drawer, folded neatly inside a small envelope. I never looked at it unless something made me uneasy. It wasn't just a document, it was my safety net. My one defense if Martin ever repeated his mistakes. And now, with the divorce looming like a winter storm, that paper was the only proof that everything we owned, especially my home, was earned by me alone. So one morning, after saving enough to take a day off, I returned to the house I once called mine. The front yard looked different, overgrown, unkempt. Jade's pink sandals lay scattered across the porch. Music thumped inside like a bar on a Friday night. When I knocked, Martin opened the door with a face full of annoyance, not remorse. "What do you want, Eleanor?" he snapped. "I'm here to pick up my documents," I said. "The ones I kept in the hallway drawer." His eyes flickered just for a second, but I noticed. Jade appeared behind him, chewing gum, wearing one of his shirts like a dress. "Oh," she said, pretending to think. "That drawer was empty when we cleaned it."
"Maybe you misplaced something, sweetie."
She called me sweetie, with a tone sharp enough to cut glass. I pushed past Martin, ignoring his protests, and went straight to the drawer. It had been ransacked. Papers scattered, old bills missing, envelopes torn open. My heart thudded painfully. I searched every corner under the bed, behind the closet, inside old cereal boxes Martin used to hide his junk. The paper was gone. Completely gone. I turned back to Martin, my voice trembling. "You took it," I said. "I know you did." He shrugged, arms crossed.
"Must we imagined it.
Nothing like that exists." Jade smirked, leaning on the doorframe.
"Maybe you re-confused.
Happens with age." Her smile nearly knocked the breath out of me.
I had endured cruelty before, but never this quiet, mocking malice.
In court, without the paper, my testimony became nothing more than an old woman's emotional memory versus legal property documents Martin conveniently possessed. The judge divided everything in half. But half meant nothing. Because Martin had all the original titles, the deed, the bank account access. And I walked away with zero. As they handed down the verdict, I felt my hands go cold.
The world around me blurred.
I wasn't just losing the house, I was losing the proof of my life's work. I walked out of that courtroom feeling smaller than I ever had, like the world had turned its back on me.
That night, in my tiny studio apartment, I pressed my forehead against the cold window and whispered into the darkness.
He stole my home, my dignity, and now my truth. It felt like everything in my life had been ripped apart. But fate wasn't done, not yet. And neither was I. I just didn't know that the thing that would save me had been sitting quietly in my belongings all along, waiting to be found. Life has a strange way of hiding truth in the smallest, most forgotten corners. Sometimes justice doesn't come from lawyers or courts, it comes from an old object covered in dust, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal itself. That was exactly what happened to me. 3 months after the court stripped me of everything I had bled for, I was living quietly in my small apartment near the highway. The nights were cold, the sound of passing trucks buzzing through the thin walls like insects I couldn't shoo away. I kept myself busy working double shifts at the diner, but when the evenings came, loneliness sat beside me like an old shadow. Even though I tried to push the memories away, my mind always drifted back to that house, the backyard where I once grew tomatoes, the living room where I used to decorate Christmas stockings, the bedroom window where I watched summer thunderstorms.
Losing the house felt like losing my identity. I was a stranger in my own life. One stormy evening, the power flickered on and off, and the rain battered the roof like angry fingers tapping.
I couldn't sleep, so I decided to sort through a box of old belongings I'd taken from the house the day Martin threw me out. The box was small, mostly things I managed to grab quickly: a sweater, a few framed photos, a stack of old receipts, and some random electronics. At the bottom, tucked beneath a tangled phone charger, I noticed a little black USB drive. It didn't look familiar at first, just a plain, worn flash drive with a faint scratch running along the side. But as soon as I held it, I remembered. I had installed small security cameras around the house years ago when break-ins were common in the neighborhood. I used that USB to save footage every few months in case something ever happened. I guess, in the rush of leaving, I had swept it into my belongings without thinking. For a long time, I just held the USB between my fingers, staring at it.
Something inside me whispered,
"Plug it in." I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just nostalgia pulling at me. The footage would probably show nothing important: gardening, Martin sleeping on the couch, maybe a raccoon digging through the trash. But something about that tiny black drive kept echoing in my heartbeat. So I grabbed my old laptop, the one that creaked when it opened, and plugged the USB in. At first, the screen loaded slowly, almost hesitantly, as if even the computer understood the weight of what I was about to see. A list of files appeared: dates, times, short clips recorded automatically each day. I clicked on the ones closest to the time before the divorce, expecting nothing more than mundane home life. But then I saw him. Martin. In the first clip, he entered our old bedroom alone. His movements were strangely deliberate. He looked over his shoulder twice, checking if anyone was watching. Even though the camera was small and hidden near the ceiling vent, he still seemed nervous. My breath caught in my throat. "What were you doing, Martin?" I whispered into the empty room. He walked straight to the old wooden drawer, the one where I had kept the signed asset agreement. Slowly he pulled it open, rummaging through the neat stack of envelopes I always kept meticulously organized. When he found the envelope I had hidden the agreement in, he froze for a moment, staring at it. Then he took it out. He held it up to the light, opened it, unfolded the paper, and smiled. A smile that tightened every muscle in my chest. A smile that said he knew exactly what he was doing and that he didn't care whom it hurt. My hands trembled so badly that I had to grip the edge of my desk. "God, you really did it," I whispered through clenched teeth. The clip continued. Martin folded the paper, tucked it into his jacket, and hurried outside. The camera from the back porch caught him next. He walked to the far corner of the backyard right behind the old fruit tree that my parents had given us when we moved in. That tree had been my favorite part of the whole yard. Its branches shaded me every time I needed a moment to breathe. I used to sit under it with a cup of tea, thinking about how far I'd come. And there he was, desecrating that peaceful memory. He knelt down, dug a hole with a small garden shovel, pulled out a rusted metal box, and placed the document inside. Then he buried it, patted the soil flat, picked up the shovel, and walked away. He didn't look guilty. He didn't hesitate. He didn't show the slightest remorse. He stole my life's proof. Buried it like garbage. When the clip ended, my world felt like it cracked open. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it echo inside my ears. Anger rose through my chest so fierce it made my skin burn. For months I had blamed myself, wondered if I had been foolish, wondered if maybe I was misremembering. People treated me like I was a confused old woman. Jade mocked my age. Martin gaslit me. And the court dismissed me. But the camera hadn't lied. And it had captured everything. I sat frozen for a long moment, my hands pressed tightly against my face. Then something inside mesomething quiet but razor-sharp snapped awake. "I'm not done," I said aloud, my voice shaking but steady. "Not yet." The next morning before sunrise, I called one of the few friends I had left, Mrs. Patterson, a retired nurse who lived a few blocks away. Her grandson owned a metal detector and knew how to dig carefully without damaging buried items. I told them only that I needed help recovering something from my old backyard. We arrived early, while the sky was still gray. My heart hammered in my chest the moment I stepped onto the property, even though I no longer owned it legally. Jade's car wasn't there, probably out for the night, chasing someone younger and richer. We walked quietly to the corner of the yard. I pointed at the fruit tree. "Here," I whispered. "This is where he buried it." Mrs. Patterson's grandson swept the metal detector across the soil. Within 30 seconds, it beeped. Strongly. He dug slowly, carefully, until something metallic scraped against the shovel blade.
A small metal box.
My stomach twisted.
My fingers trembled as I wiped the dirt off the lid.
When I opened it, the paper inside was slightly damp, but intact.
The ink still strong. Martin's signature still visible. The date still clear.
Everything was preserved as if fate had protected it for me. I clutched it to my chest, tears streaming down my cheeks.
This is it, I whispered.
This is what they said didn't exist. 2 days later, I filed a motion for retrial with the new evidence. At first, the clerk looked at me like I was wasting my time until she saw the footage. Then everything changed. The judge reviewed the video, the fingerprints on the metal box, and the document itself. A new hearing was scheduled immediately. Jade didn't even bother showing up. Martin sat in the courtroom, pale and trembling, like he was seeing the ghost of his own wrongdoing rise up from the grave. When the judge struck the gavel, the words felt like redemption itself. All assets are hereby returned to Mrs.
Eleanor Brooks.
The previous ruling is overturned. The agreement is valid. Just like that, the house, the land, the savings, everything was returned to me legally. Martin collapsed into his chair, his face drained of all pride. Jade moved out that same afternoon, leaving him without a penny or a place to sleep. Within weeks, he became what he had once mocked.
A man sleeping under bridges. A man begging outside convenience stores.
A man whose greatest enemy was himself. Someone told me they saw him wandering near the bus station with his clothes torn, hair unwashed, muttering apologies no one heard. And when the news finally reached me, I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate, I didn't feel triumphant. I simply whispered,
"What goes around comes around."
Because life may take its time. But justice never forgets its way home. After winning the retrial and reclaiming my home, I thought the ache inside me would fade. People assume justice heals all wounds, that once you get back what was taken, your heart somehow patches itself together. But pain doesn't disappear just because the law finally did the right thing. The truth is, even with my house restored to me, the walls felt hollow, the air felt stale, and every corner carried the shadow of Martin's betrayal. The first night I slept in the house again, I couldn't close my eyes. I kept hearing echoes, his laughter with that young woman, Jade's mocking tone, the slamming of my own belongings being thrown out the door. Trauma has a way of living in the walls long after the people who caused it are gone. Weeks passed slowly. I cleaned every room from top to bottom, repainted the walls, scrubbed the floors until my knees bruised. But grief clung to me like dust I couldn't wipe away. I went through my days silently, eating alone at the same dining table where I'd once served holiday meals, sitting alone on the porch swing where I used to drink coffee with Martin in quiet mornings before life hardened him. I wondered if I would ever feel whole again. Then one morning, as the sun filtered through the living room blinds, I heard the front door open. "Mom." My heart jolted. Standing there in his black clerical shirt and collar, suitcase in hand, was my son, Father Samuel Brooks.
My only child.
My one source of pride that Martin could never taint. It had been months since I last saw him. He'd been serving at a parish several states away.
Before I knew it, tears welled in my eyes. "Sam," I whispered.
He rushed over, wrapped his arms around me, and held me the way he did when he was a boy afraid of thunderstorms. For the first time in months, my heart softened.
My little boy, now a grown man of God, had come home.
When he stepped back, he studied me closely. "You lost weight," he said quietly.
"And you look so tired." "I'm all right," I lied, wiping my cheek.
"I've been managing." He didn't push, didn't scold. He simply took my hands. "Mom, I came home because I heard what happened. And because I couldn't stand the thought of you dealing with all this alone." We sat in the kitchen, where he brewed coffee for both of us. He moved with a calm gentleness that reminded me of his father in the first years of our marriage before cursing, gambling, and selfishness overtook him. Samuel waited until I finished talking, until I spilled everything I had held inside. The betrayal. The lies.
Jade. The humiliation. The court.
The second trial. Martin becoming homeless. When I finally fell silent, Samuel didn't speak right away. He looked out the window as if searching for the right words, the kind that wouldn't break me further. Then he asked quietly, "Mom, do you hate him?" That question hit me harder than anything Martin had ever thrown at me. I swallowed hard before answering. How could I not? I said. He threw me out like I was trash. He let another woman walk into the home I built. He stole from me, lied to me, humiliated me. And when I needed him to show even an ounce of respect, he buried the one thing that proved my worth. Samuel nodded slowly, absorbing every word. I understand, he said softly. And I'm not asking you to forget what he did. But I want to tell you something I've learned from years of listening to people's confessions. He reached across the table and held my trembling hand. Forgiveness, he said, isn't for the other person. It's for you. I stiffened. My throat burned. He continued, voice steady and sincere. When you refuse to forgive someone who hurt you, you're the one who keeps carrying the burden. They walk free, and you hold the weight. And you deserve better than that, Mom. You deserve peace. I pulled my hand back. Not out of anger, but because I didn't know how to hold onto something so painfully true. Peace. I whispered. How am I supposed to find peace when he ruined my life? Samuel breathed deeply. I saw him, Mom. My heart froze. You saw who? Dad. The word dad felt strange now, almost foreign. I hadn't used it myself in a long time. Samuel continued. I found him sleeping under the highway overpass near the bus station. He was curled up under a torn blanket. He looked fragile. I hardly recognized him. Images flashed in my mind. Martin with dirty clothes, shaking from hunger, alone in the dark. A man who once stood tall, now reduced to a shadow. He told me he was afraid, Samuel said softly. Afraid of facing you. Afraid of dying alone. He said he doesn't expect forgiveness. He believes he doesn't deserve it. I stared at my coffee cup, fighting the swirl of emotions twisting inside me: anger, pity, sorrow, exhaustion. Mom, Samuel said gently, I'm not asking you to take him back as a husband. And I'm not asking you to forget what he did. I'm asking you to let your heart breathe again. To let go of the bitterness so it doesn't consume the years you have left. My lips trembled. A tear slid down my cheek before I could stop it. I don't know if I can, I whispered truthfully. He broke every piece of trust one ever had. Samuel touched my shoulder lightly. Maybe, he said, the first step is just hearing him out. Letting him speak. Seeing whether the remorse is real. The room fell into a deep, aching silence. The kind that presses on your chest and makes each breath feel like a choice. I knew Samuel wasn't wrong. But he wasn't right either. Forgiveness wasn't simple. Not after a lifetime of wounds. Still something inside me softened, not toward Martin, but toward myself. Toward the version of me who deserved a lighter heart. Samuel gave me one last look filled with hope and said, Mom, healing isn't about fixing the past. It's about choosing what kind of future you want to carry. When he stood to leave the room, I heard his final words echo long after his footsteps faded. He's not the same man anymore. And neither are you. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, torn between wounds that refused to close and a son who believed I was strong enough to rise above them. I didn't know what the right answer was. But I knew one thing. Whether I liked it or not, the next chapter of my life would lead me back to the same man who had once destroyed me. And the question waiting there was one I didn't yet know how to answer.
Could I face Martin Brooks again?
Not as his wife. Not as his victim. But as a woman who finally had the power to choose. The morning after Samuel told me he had found Martin sleeping under a bridge, I moved around the house like a ghost. Every sound felt louder than usual: the creak of the staircase, the hum of the refrigerator, the chirping of birds outside my window. It was as if the whole world knew something was about to happen, and only I was pretending not to notice. I spent the day cleaning the kitchen for no reason, organizing drawers that were already organized, wiping surfaces that had nothing on them.
My mind raced in circles. Should I let Martin speak to me?
Should I slam the door in his face? Should I even care what happened to him? By late afternoon, exhaustion sat heavy on my shoulders, yet my thoughts were still sharp, restless. I stepped outside to sit on the porch. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the yard, the same yard where Martin had once buried the proof of my life's work. That memory stung like a fresh cut every time it flashed in my mind.
I closed my eyes, letting the soft breeze brush my face.
That was when I heard footsteps.
Slow, uneven, almost dragging across the ground.
My eyes opened. Samuel appeared first, walking up the driveway. And behind him was Martin. I didn't recognize him at first. I had seen him beaten down before, but never broken. His coat was torn. His shoes didn't match. His beard had grown uneven and wild. His face looked sunken, sallow, older than his years. A man who once strutted around with false pride now looked like he had been scraped off the streets. When he reached the bottom of the porch steps, he stopped, as if there was an invisible line he wasn't sure he was allowed to cross. His eyes lifted to meet mine. And I saw something in them that I had never seen, not in the 40 years we were married, not in the moments he begged forgiveness for gambling, not when he made promises he never kept. Shame.
Deep, painful, human shame.
I didn't speak at first. I couldn't.
My voice felt trapped somewhere between anger and sorrow.
I braced myself, lifting my chin slightly, keeping my expression calm even though my chest tightened with every breath. Martin swallowed hard, his throat visibly trembling. When he tried to speak, his voice cracked like dry branches snapping under pressure.
Eleanor, he rasped. Zwei Dawn, T deserve to be here.
I folded my arms, not out of hostility, but to hold myself together. You're right, I replied coldly. You don't. He flinched. His eyes dropped to the wooden steps. I'm not here to ask for forgiveness, he said. I know I gave up any right to that. I need to tell you something.
I need you to hear me once, just once, and then I'll go.
I remained silent. Silence, I learned, is sometimes more powerful than shouting. He took a shaky breath. When I threw you out of this house, I thought I was starting a new life. I was stupid enough to believe a woman half my age loved me. I told myself I deserved happiness. But his voice splintered. But I never understood what I had until I saw what I did to you. I felt the sting of tears but blinked them away. I wouldn't break before him. He continued. I've had a lot of nights to think, sleeping on sidewalks and under bridges. A lot of time to understand what I became. And every night, every single night, I saw you standing in the rain with your bags at your feet. I can't forgive myself for that. His hands shook uncontrollably as he folded them together.
I am not the man you married.
I'm not even the man I pretended to be. I'm just an old fool who hurt the only person who ever stood by him. I breathed heavily, gripping the porch railing. You hurt me more than anyone else ever could, I said quietly.
You broke something inside me.
And for a long time, I thought I'd never feel whole again.
Martin shut his eyes, tears spilling from the corners.
I know, he whispered. And I'm sorry.
I am so sorry, Eleanor.
Not because I got caught.
Not because I am alone now.
But because I see it all clearly now. I see what I destroyed. And I would give anything to take it back. But life doesn't work like that. He lowered himself slowly onto his knees. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to tell him to stand up, was too old to kneel like that. But another part of meth part still raw and wounded watched silently, feeling every shift of power that had been stolen from me and was now being returned. I'm not asking for a place in your life, Martin said, still kneeling. I'm tired, Eleanor.
I am tired of running from myself, tired of being hungry, tired of sleeping in the cold.
I don't want to die on the street like a dog. He lifted his eyes again. If you let me, I would sleep in the shed. I would work for my food.
I want to touch anything that is yours. I want to raise my voice.
I won't drink.
I want to gamble.
I won't leave the yard unless you tell me.
I just need somewhere to be human again.
His words sliced through me like a dull knife. Samuel placed a hand gently on my shoulder. Mom, he murmured, you don't owe him your life. But maybe you can give him a corner of it.
I shook my head slowly. Not out of refusal, out of confusion.
Because inside me, two voices battled fiercely. One voice screamed. He doesn't deserve a second chance. Let him suffer. Let him feel everything he made you feel.
The other voice whispered. Don't let bitterness rule what little time you have left.
I looked at Martin again. His posture was collapsed, defeated. The man who once walked with swagger was now trembling on his knees like a sinner at confession. And something in mesomething I thought had died felt the faintest ache of compassion.
Not forgiveness.
Not love. Not yet. But something more fragile, more human.
I exhaled a long, shaky breath. Get up, I said softly.
Martin lifted his head, startled. I'm not letting you sleep on the street, I continued. But listen carefully, you don't step into this house like nothing happened. You don't get to pretend the past didn't happen. You will earn every inch of space I allow you.
Do you understand me?
He nodded rapidly, tears streaming freely.
Yes, Eleanor.
I swear.
I swear on my life.
You'll sleep in the storage room, I said firmly. It's dusty, it's cramped, and it's not comfortable. But it's more than you gave me when you tossed me into the rain. Martin bowed his head, sobbing. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you even though I don't deserve it. I turned away so he wouldn't see the crack in my expression. Don't thank me yet, I said. This is not forgiveness. This is shelter. And one wrong step, one drink, one lie, one raised voice and you're gone. He pressed his hand to his chest. I won't fail. Not again. For the first time in decades, the balance of power between us shifted not because he was weak, but because I had finally found the strength I had always deserved. I stepped aside and opened the door. Come in, I said quietly.
Not as my husband. Not as my partner.
But as a man starting over at the very bottom. Martin entered the house hesitantly, almost fearfully, like a visitor stepping into a church after years of absence. And as I closed the door behind him, I realized something. This was not the end of our story. It was the beginning of a new chapter. One I never expected to write. One filled with uncertainty. one that tested every soft part of my heart. But it was mine to choose. Martin moved into the storage room the same evening he arrived. I watched him carry his torn duffel bag across the hallway, shoulders hunched, steps uncertain, like a man stepping into a home he didn't believe he deserved. The room was small and smelled faintly of old paint and dust. It had no carpet, no heat, and certainly no comfort. But he didn't complain. He didn't even look around. He just lowered his head and whispered, "This is more than I deserve." For the first few days, the house felt like a stranger's space again, two people living under one roof, but separated by years of pain. I didn't speak unless necessary. He didn't speak unless spoken to. Samuel visited often, checking on us, gently guiding us as if we were two wounded souls learning how to breathe in the same air.
Every morning, before the sun rose, I heard movement outside my window.
At first, I thought raccoons were rummaging through the trash. But when I peeked out one morning at 4:45 a.m., I saw Martin sweeping the driveway, his back bent, his breath fogging in the cold morning air.
The sight froze me.
He used to sleep until 8, sometimes 9, never lifting a finger unless it benefited him. Now he was doing the kind of work he once mocked. And he kept doing it. Day after day. He fixed the broken shutters I had been putting off since spring. He replaced the rusted hinges on the back gate. He repaired the loose boards on the porch steps. He cleaned the gutters so thoroughly I thought they might shine. One afternoon, I caught him sanding an old wooden chair I had almost thrown out. His hands were blistered, trembling slightly. For the first time in my life, I saw the man he could have been, the kind of man I had prayed he would become decades ago. But I didn't let my heart soften too quickly. Pain teaches caution. And my caution had become a shield. I kept my distance, observing quietly. But even through that distance, I saw his transformation, slow, earnest, painful. When Samuel invited him to volunteer at the church's community kitchen, Martin agreed without hesitation. I followed him one day without telling him. I stood near the entrance, hidden enough that he wouldn't see me. I watched as he served soup to the homeless, hands shaking but steady enough. I watched as he cleaned tables with quiet concentration. I watched as he helped an elderly man find a seat and wrapped a blanket gently around his shoulders. And I felt something inside me twist. Because Martin had never shown kindness so effortlessly before. Maybe suffering had peeled away the parts of him that were rotten. Maybe humility had planted something new in their place. Still, I kept my guard. Even the most broken man could slip back into old habits. But he didn't. Not once. Weeks turned into months, and Martin did everything without being asked, without expecting praise. He ate sparsely, slept early, refused to touch alcohol, and never raised his voice. He walked softly, like someone afraid to disturb even the dust in the corners of the house. One cold Sunday evening, after he finished mopping the kitchen floor, he approached me slowly. "Eleanor," he said gently, "I want to talk. Only if you'll let me." I nodded reluctantly. He wiped his hands nervously on his jeans.
I know I can undo the past. I can erase the years I made you cry. I can take back the day I threw you out into the rain like you were nothing. His voice cracked. That memory keeps me awake every night. And I saw a depth in his eyes I had never seen before. "I want you to know," he continued, "that every morning I wake up here I am grateful. Not because I deserve this roof, but because you allowed me a place beneath it. You didn't have to. Most people wouldn't have." I felt my throat tighten, but I stayed silent. He looked down at his hands. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to love me. I don't expect anything. But I want to spend whatever time I have left being the man I should have been for you all those years."
He stepped back, as though afraid to stand too close. If you ever need anything, if something breaks, if the garden needs tending, if you're sick or tired, I'll be here.
I'll show up. Every time. Just say the word.
He waited, maybe hoping I would speak.
But I couldn't, not yet.
Not because I didn't feel something, but because feeling anything scared me. The next morning, he left a cup of tea on the kitchen counter.
No note. No words. Just tea, just warmth.
Small gestures grew, day by day. He replaced the bulbs on the porch before I even noticed they were dim. He folded laundry but left it neatly outside my door instead of bringing it in. He left fresh fruit on the table every morning. Not once did he ask for thanks. One evening, I returned home late after visiting a neighbor. When I opened the front door, I found Martin asleep at the dining table, his head resting on his arms. The tablecloth was spread neatly. 2 bowls of hot stew remained untouched. He must have tried to stay awake just to make sure I had dinner. My heart ached in a way I wasn't prepared for.
Why now? I whispered to myself.
Why after all these years? I went to bed without waking him, but that night I cried quietly into my pillow, not out of sadness, but out of the unbearable weight of compassion I had tried to suppress. The next morning, something shifted. For the first time in months, I knocked on his door. He opened it cautiously, like a man bracing himself for punishment. "Breakfast is ready," I said simply. He blinked, stunned. His lips parted like he wasn't sure he heard me right. You want me to join you?" he asked. I didn't smile. But I nodded. He followed me into the kitchen, sitting on the far end of the table. We didn't speak at first. The silence wasn't cold, Anna-Marie, it was healing, like air after a long storm. He hesitated before lifting his spoon. "Thank you," he whispered. I didn't answer. But something in me softened like butter on warm bread. Over the next weeks, we shared more meals, small conversations at first, then longer ones. He told me about his nights on the street, the hunger, the cold, the regret. I told him about my loneliness, my resentment, my fears. We didn't pretend we were the couple we once were. We didn't pretend trust came back overnight. But we began learning how to exist together, not as husband and wife, but as 2 flawed humans trying to be better than their worst moments.
One night, after dinner, Martin stood in the doorway.
"I want to thank you," he said softly. "You didn't have to let me in. You didn't have to listen. You didn't have to see me as anything but the man who wronged you. But you did. And I'll never stop being grateful." I looked at his trembling hands, his tired face, the humility that seemed carved into his bones now. "Martin," I finally said, "I don't know if forgiveness is something I can promise. But I do know I'm not angry anymore." He covered his mouth with one hand, tears filling his eyes. "That's more than I ever hoped for," he whispered. And in that moment, something inside something heavy and cold finally eased. The bitterness, the rage, the humiliation all loosened their grip. Months later, spring arrived. Samuel visited with flowers and a camera. He asked us to sit on the porch, just for a photograph.
I sat in my rocking chair.
Martin sat beside Menet, touching, not assuming, simply present. Samuel lifted the camera. "Look at me, Mom," he said gently. I turned my head slightly. Martin's hand rested lightly on his knee, close but not touching mine. His eyes were soft, humble, grateful.
The shutter clicked.
Later that night, Samuel emailed me the picture. I opened it on my old laptop. In the photo, we weren't husband and wife. We weren't enemies. We weren't broken people fighting old battles. We were 2 aging souls, sitting next to each other in the calm after a lifelong storm. 2 people who had lost everything. and somehow found something new in the ruins. A peace I never believed I would feel again. A peace earned not by forgetting, but by allowing room for change. A peace that whispered quietly, "It's not too late to heal." And for the first time in decades, I believed it.